Sergeant Elena Carter adjusted the strap of her rifle and squinted into the thick green haze ahead. The jungle stretched endlessly, a labyrinth of towering trees, twisting vines, and mist that swallowed sound like a living creature. It was early morning, but the sun barely penetrated the canopy, leaving the air cool and damp. Every footstep she took was measured, deliberate, as though the ground itself could betray her position. Behind her, her small reconnaissance team moved silently, the weight of their packs and rifles pressing against their backs. Elena had joined the army at 18, driven by a mix of honor, restlessness, and a desire to escape the quiet pain of her small Texas hometown. Her father, a Vietnam veteran, had taught her that courage wasn't about fearlessness. It was about action in the face of fear. She carried that lesson with her now, every step echoing his voice. You'll know who you are when everything falls apart. And it will. Trust yourself. Her team's mission was supposed to be routine survey and gather intelligence on a suspected insurgent route used for smuggling arms. The area was remote, almost uninhabited, and the local guides had warned them to be cautious. The radio communication from base had grown weak halfway through their trek. Intermittent static now punctuated every attempt at contact. Elena tightened her jaw. Keep moving. Eyes sharp. Don't make noise unless you have to, she said quietly, her voice carrying authority that even the rookies respected. Private Lang, the youngest in the group, kept glancing over his shoulder. Every snapped twig made him flinch, and his hands trembled over his rifle. Corporal Dwyer, the medic, tried to lighten the mood, cracking small jokes that barely masked his own tension. The jungle was alive with soundbirds, insects, and the occasional rustle of a distant animal, but there was also a weightless silence, something beneath the noise that felt wrong. Elena's instincts prickled. She'd been in tense situations before, but there was something in this air, something almost tangible. The locals had called the region El Valle del Silencio, the Valley of Silence, and she understood why. Every sound seemed muffled, swallowed by the dense foliage. Even the sunlight didn't penetrate fully, leaving the world in shades of green and shadow. As they moved deeper, Elena's mind drifted to her father again. He had once told her, "You can't just follow orders blindly. You have to feel the terrain, read the signs. The jungle speaks if you listen." Now, she felt it, the subtle change in the air, the faint shift in the direction of leaves, the way the shadows seemed to twitch. Someone or something was watching them. Her earpiece crackled. "Sergeant Carter? You copy?" Static. Then silence. "Copy," she whispered. No response. She cursed under her breath, scanning the trees. Backup was hours away at best. If anything happened here, they were on their own. The squad paused at a river crossing. The water was shallow but muddy, the banks slick with moss and mud. Elena knelt, inspecting the tracks. Fresh, human, too large for any of the local wildlife. She gestured for the team to form a perimeter. "We've got company," she said, her voice low, steady, but carrying an unmistakable edge. "Stay quiet. Move slow. Eyes everywhere." Lang swallowed hard, trying to mask his fear with a nod. Dwyer offered a reassuring smile, though the tightness around his eyes betrayed him. Elena felt a pang of responsibility, a weight she couldn't shrug off. These men trusted her with their lives, and she intended to honor that trust. Hours passed, the heat building, sweat dripping down their necks. Each sound branch snapping, distant animal call, the whisper of wind through leaves made them tense. The jungle seemed to close around them, an invisible wall of green and threat. Then came the scream. It was faint at first, almost lost among the background noise of the forest. Then it cut through the air, piercing, raw, human. Elena froze, hand instinctively going to her rifle. The teen followed her lead, every muscle tensed, hearts pounding. She signaled for silence. Hold positions. Identify the source, slowly. Another scream, closer this time, followed by rustling. Something moved quickly between the trees, a shadow too large and purposeful to be an animal. Elena's mind raced. It could be insurgents. It could be someone in trouble. Either way, this was no longer just an intelligence mission. Stay tight, she whispered. No mistakes. The squad moved with practiced precision, forming a defensive triangle. Elena's eyes darted across the tree line, analyzing angles, calculating distances. Every sound was a potential threat. Every shadow could hide a gun barrel. Suddenly, a figure appeared, a local guide they had been counting on, limping, blood streaked across his clothes. He gasped for air, pointing shakily back the way they came. They ambush. Coming, he stammered. Then he collapsed. Elena rushed forward, checking the guide's pulse. Weak, but alive. She signaled Dwyer to stabilize him. Then she looked back into the jungle. The shadows had shifted. Footsteps, deliberate and fast, approached from multiple directions. Her rifle was up in a second, her finger tight on the trigger. No one moved. No one spoke. Only the wind carried a whisper through the trees, and the jungle seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Elena's heart pounded, but her mind was razor-sharp. She thought of her father again, of every moment that had prepared her for this instant. She took a slow, deliberate breath. They called for backup, she murmured, but we're it. We hold, we survive. We protect each other. A snap of a branch, a warning, or a trap. She couldn't tell. She scanned the dense foliage, searching for movement, for any glint of metal, for the unmistakable hint of danger. Every instinct screamed at her to fire, but she waited, calculating. Then came the first shot. The jungle exploded around them. Gunfire ripped through the silence, bullets striking leaves, trees, and earth. Elena dove for cover, rolling behind a fallen log. Her squad reacted instantly, rifles raised, suppressing fire returning from the shadows. The jungle that had seemed so alive only moments ago was now chaos incarnate. Screams, shots, and the thundering pulse of fear. Elena's heart was a drum in her chest. She scanned the tree line, identifying threats, directing her team with clear, precise commands. Lang, left flank. Dwyer, cover rear. Move. She fired. 1, 2, 3 shots calm, accurate, deadly. One attacker fell, and for a moment the jungle held again, a fragile, trembling silence. Then another shadow moved. Elena gritted her teeth. This was only the beginning. The mission had shifted. No longer reconnaissance. Now survival. And every second counted. As the sun struggled to rise over the horizon, casting pale light through the mist, Elena realized one undeniable truth. In this jungle, no one was coming to help them. They were alone, and she would have to lead them through hell. The forest seemed to close in around them, a living, breathing entity that fed on fear. Every step Elena Carter took was deliberate, careful, her boots sinking slightly into the damp soil. The air was heavy, sticky with humidity, and thick with the smell of earth and decaying vegetation. It clung to her uniform, making her sweat even more in the early morning heat. The radio remained dead, the static mocking. No backup was coming. Not yet. Not today. Behind her, Private Lang shuffled nervously, eyes wide, scanning the dark undergrowth as though expecting every shadow to erupt into violence. His rifle wobbled in his trembling hands. I don't like this, he muttered. You're not supposed to, Elena said without looking back. Her voice was calm, almost detached, but carried the weight of command. Fear keeps you alive. Don't let it paralyze you. Corporal Dwyer, the medic, tried to offer reassurance, but even his usual humor was forced. At least it's not boring, right? He joked, though his own hands shook as he checked the ammo in his rifle. Elena didn't answer. She was too busy listening. There was a rhythm to the jungle birds, calling in distant canopy, insects humming, the faint trickle of water somewhere unseen. But underneath it, she could feel the irregularity, the unnatural pauses between sounds. Footsteps that didn't match any animal she knew. Rustling that carried the wrong weight. They crossed a narrow river, its muddy banks slit and treacherous. Elena crouched, scanning the far side. Tracks, fresh tracks, pressed deeply into the wet soil. Too large for any animal, too deliberate. She traced them with her eyes, noting the pace, the direction, the spacing. Someone or a group had moved this way recently, and they weren't friendly. "Sir," Lang whispered, pointing to the tracks. His voice quivered. "They're close, aren't they?" "They are," Elena confirmed softly. "And they know we're here. That's why we move slow. Stay alert. Eyes everywhere." The squad pressed on, keeping to the shadows, every movement deliberate. Sweat streaked their faces as they navigated twisted roots and dense underbrush. Elena felt her senses sharpening, the jungle speaking to her in subtle signs, birds scattering unexpectedly, leaves quivering, the faint scent of smoke carried by the wind. Then came the first sign of trouble. A distant shout, muffled, almost swallowed by the fog. Elena froze, hand tightening on her rifle. She signaled for the team to halt. Silence followed, heavy and oppressive. The sound came again, closer this time, a human voice raw with fear. "Move!" She hissed, leading them into a narrow corridor of trees, the only cover available. The squad huddled, each soldier instinctively pressing against bark, scanning for movement. Every muscle in Elena's body was tense, ready to react. Minutes passed like hours. The jungle was quiet again, but Elena knew it was a deceptive calm. She gestured for Dwyer to check Lang's weapon. "Make sure he's ready," she said. "One shot. One chance." The medic nodded, moving with efficiency born of experience. Lang's hands shook as he reloaded, the weight of responsibility settling on his young shoulders. Elena didn't flinch. She had seen fear before. She had felt it herself. And she had learned to use it, to turn it into focus, into precision. Suddenly, a movement in the corner of her eye, a shadow slipping between trees. Elena froze, raising her rifle. She tracked it silently, muscles coiled. The figure was fast, deliberate. Not an animal. Not local wildlife. Someone was watching. Someone was waiting. "Contact front." She barked, her voice low but sharp. The squad reacted instantly, weapons raised, ready for engagement. But the figure vanished into the green maze, leaving only the faintest rustle of leaves. The team pressed on, but tension had shifted into full alert. Elena led them deeper, through dense undergrowth and over treacherous slopes, every sense on edge. Rain began to fall, heavy droplets beating on their helmets and shoulders, masking some of the noise, but adding to the oppressive weight of the jungle. Hours passed. The heat, the humidity, the constant vigilance, it all gnawed at their resolve. They navigated a narrow ravine, each step measured to avoid slipping, to avoid making unnecessary noise. Elena's mind drifted briefly to her father again, recalling his words about reading the terrain, about patience, about using fear to sharpen focus. She had never needed those lessons more than now. Then came the unmistakable sound of snapping wood. Not a branch broken by careless movement, but deliberate, precise like a footfall on a dead limb. Elena froze, eyes scanning. Another snap. Closer. Faster. "They're here," she whispered. Dwyer moved beside her, checking Lang's shoulder. The young private nodded, face pale. Elena took a deep breath, centering herself. Her rifle rose instinctively, her eye finding the scope. She could feel her heartbeat in her temples, but her hands were steady. This was her element: survival, combat, focus. From the shadows, a figure lunged. Elena squeezed the trigger. A sharp crack echoed through the trees. The figure fell, leaving a faint cloud of dust and leaves. Another appeared, a dozen more, emerging silently from the undergrowth, weapons raised. The ambush had begun. Bullets tore through leaves and bark, striking near the squad. Elena barked orders, directing movement, assigning sectors, returning fire with deadly precision. "Left flank, Lang. Cover Dwyer." She shouted, then took aim again, dispatching another attacker. The team moved as a single unit, trained, disciplined, deadly. Rain mixed with sweat and blood as the firefight intensified. Elena dove behind a fallen tree, returning fire with calculated bursts. Each shot, each command, each movement was a dance of survival. She counted heads, noting the fallen and the injured, recalculating the odds in real time. In the chaos, Lang froze, rifle raised but unmoving. Elena didn't hesitate. She kicked him in the leg, snapping him out of paralysis. "Focus. You fight or you die," she yelled. His eyes widened, and he immediately engaged, firing at a target she indicated. Dwyer was pinned down, taking return fire, but Elena's cover allowed him to move a few steps, dragging a wounded attacker out of the line of fire. The jungle was alive with motion, but Elena's mind remained razor-sharp. Every decision, every reaction mattered. The firefight finally waned as the attackers retreated into the thick green haze, leaving the squad battered, bruised, and breathing heavily. Elena wiped the sweat and blood from her brow. 3 members of her team were wounded, one gravely. Several attackers lay neutralized. The jungle returned to its deceptive calm, the echoes of gunfire fading into mist. Elena surveyed the scene. The cost was high. The jungle had tested them and taken its toll. But the mission wasn't over. The radio still silent. Backup still hours away. She knelt beside Lang, checking his pulse. "You did good," she said quietly, though the tremor in his hands betrayed the lingering fear. "Stay sharp. It's not done yet." Through the fog and rain, Elena stared into the dense trees. Somewhere in the shadows, they were still out there. Somewhere in the jungle, the enemy waited, watching, calculating. Her jaw tightened. "We survive," she whispered to herself. "We finish this. And we bring everyone home." With that resolve, Elena signaled her squad to move. Every step was calculated, every sound noted. The jungle had claimed its first round, but she knew this battle was far from over. The silence that followed was not peaceful, it was pregnant with threat. The Valley of Silence had only begun to speak. The jungle erupted in chaos. One second it had been silent, the next it became a living nightmare of gunfire, shouts, and screams. Elena Carter rolled behind a fallen tree, the mud and leaves soaking her uniform, as bullets tore into the canopy above and ricocheted off the trunks around her. Her heart hammered in her chest, but her mind was icy, calculating every movement, every possible line of attack. "Return fire. Don't let them flank us," she shouted, her voice cutting through the din. She could hear Dwyer calling out coordinates for the wounded, and Lang's panicked voice, somewhere to her left, firing blindly into the shadows. Elena's eyes darted across the trees. She spotted a sniper's glint high in the canopy, a reflection of sunlight on metal. She inhaled slowly, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. One shot, precise, fatal. The sniper slumped, and for a fleeting moment, silence reclaimed the forest, but it was temporary. The attackers weren't done. More figures emerged from the shadows, moving like ghosts through the green hell of vines and fog. Elena ducked as another volley of gunfire cut through the air, sending splinters of bark into the mud. She cursed under her breath, scanning the tree line. Form a defensive perimeter, now. The squad moved like clockwork. Each member knew their role, each movement rehearsed, yet fueled by raw instinct. Lang, shaking violently, followed Elena's orders, his shots landing with unpredictable but lethal accuracy. Dwyer moved to shield the wounded, dragging them into cover while returning fire. Elena herself was everywhere at once, moving, firing, directing. A grenade landed nearby, hissing ominously. Elena kicked it away just in time, the explosion sending dirt and debris into her face. She wiped the mud from her eyes, breathed, and refocused. No time to panic. Panic was death in this jungle. The firefight raged on for what felt like hours. Bullets whizzed past, embedding themselves in trees, mud, and the occasional leaf. Elena fired with precision, her rifle spitting controlled bursts. Every shot counted. Every command mattered. Suddenly, she saw movement, a shadow moving unnaturally fast through the underbrush. Her instinct screamed, "Sniper." She scanned quickly, found the glint of another scope hidden in the branches. Elena held her breath, aimed, and fired. Another attacker neutralized. But the cost was high. Half her team lay wounded or unconscious, and 3 men friends, brothers in arms, had fallen. Elena's stomach twisted, but she didn't let grief slow her. There was no time. Survival demanded focus. Lang's voice broke through her concentration, panicked. "Sergeant, there. They're surrounding us." Elena's eyes swept the perimeter. It was true. The attackers had flanked them, using the jungle's natural cover to their advantage. She assessed the situation rapidly, calculating angles, distances, and likely points of entry. Hold your ground. Use the fallen logs and terrain. Don't give them the high ground. Dwyer grunted as he fired from behind a fig tree, dragging one of the wounded into cover. Elena moved alongside him, picking off enemies who crept too close. She was a force of nature, calm and deadly, guiding her team through the storm of bullets and chaos. In the midst of the firefight, Elena saw Lang freeze, his rifle raised but hands trembling uncontrollably. Without thinking, she kicked his leg, snapping him out of paralysis. "Focus. You fight or you die." She barked. Lang's eyes widened, and he immediately engaged, firing at a target Elena pointed out. His fear fueled his accuracy, each shot finding its mark. Suddenly, a close explosion shook the earth beneath them. A grenade thrown too close to the squad exploded, throwing Dwyer against a tree and knocking him unconscious. Elena's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. She dragged Dwyer to relative safety, checking him quickly. He was alive but dazed. The attackers surged again, relentless. Elena fired round after round, her rifle's recoil steady, precise. She moved through the mud and leaves, a whirlwind of calculated action, each movement fluid, lethal. The jungle screamed around her, but she had found a rhythm in the chaos. She spotted a group of attackers attempting to retreat through the trees. With a steady hand, she raised her rifle and fired, taking out 3 before they could vanish into the fog. Then she heard the snapping of branches, behind her another flank. She spun, rifle ready, and dispatched another before they could aim. The battle reached its crescendo as Elena's ammo dwindled. She checked her magazine, barely enough for a few more controlled bursts. She needed a plan. Retreat wasn't an option. The terrain offered no advantage for withdrawal. Survival depended on strategy, not just firepower. Her eyes caught the faint movement of a makeshift trail, slightly elevated terrain she could use as a vantage point. "Lang, follow me," she shouted, gripping his shoulder and dragging him toward the ridge. The squad followed, firing sporadically, covering their movement. They reached the ridge, and Elena quickly surveyed the battlefield below. Most attackers had retreated into the thick green fog, but a few remained, attempting to regroup. Elena's mind raced. She had limited ammo, limited options, and 3 injured soldiers counting on her. Then she saw it, the sniper position, hidden perfectly in the canopy. One shot could neutralize the remaining threat. She raised her rifle, steadying her breath. Time seemed to stretch, every heartbeat loud in her ears. She squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed through the jungle. One enemy fell. Silence returned briefly, but it was deceptive. The jungle's shadows seemed to move, to breathe. Elena knew the danger wasn't over. She called her squad closer, eyes scanning, ears straining for any hint of movement. Lang, pale and shaken, clutched his rifle tighter, finally understanding the full weight of survival in this unforgiving terrain. Dwyer groaned, still dazed, but alive. Elena patted his shoulder, her voice steady. "We're still here, but this isn't over. Keep moving, stay sharp, watch every shadow." The sun struggled to rise through the thick canopy, casting dappled light across the battlefield. Mud, leaves, and blood stained the ground. The attackers had vanished, but their presence lingered, a constant threat. Elena's team was battered, exhausted, but alive. She took a moment, breath ragged, to process the losses. Half her unit was down, 3 of her friends gone, and several wounded. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to push past grief. This was survival. Every second counted. Every movement mattered. Elena glanced at Lang, trembling, and Dwyer, still groaning but holding on to consciousness. She saw fear, yes, but also resilience. They had survived the first ambush against impossible odds, and she knew they would survive the next if she could guide them. The jungle had claimed its first round, but the war was far from over. Somewhere in the thick green fog, enemies waited, regrouped, and planned. Elena's jaw tightened. They had underestimated her and her team. They would regret it. She gathered her squad, her voice low but firm. "Listen, we're not done. We regroup, we move, we survive. Every step counts. And we bring everyone home. Understand?" Lang nodded, still pale but resolute. Dwyer gave a weak, determined smile. Elena checked her rifle, reloaded, and took the first step forward. The jungle loomed ahead, alive and dangerous, but she walked into it without hesitation. This was only the beginning. The Valley of Silence had spoken once. Elena knew it would speak again, and when it did, she would be ready. Night fell like a velvet shroud over the jungle, muffling the sounds of the retreating attackers, but replacing them with something far more unsettling. An oppressive, unnatural silence. Rain began to fall, first in light droplets, then in heavy sheets that drummed relentlessly on leaves, soaking the ground and the soldiers alike. The once vivid green of the canopy became a darker, almost black maze, hiding every movement, every potential threat. Sergeant Elena Carter moved cautiously through the mud-soaked undergrowth, eyes scanning the shadows. Her rifle was loaded, at the ready. Her uniform was torn and streaked with blood, mud, and sweat. She had counted every second since the ambush, every heartbeat, every breath, and knew that survival now depended on vigilance, strategy, and sheer willpower. Corporal Dwyer, still dazed from the earlier explosion, struggled to stay upright. Elena helped him along, supporting him under her arm, while keeping her other hand on her rifle. "We need cover," she whispered, voice low but firm. "We can't survive exposed. Not tonight." Private Lang trudged beside them, face pale, eyes wide, and hands shaking as he clutched his rifle. His lips trembled, muttering under his breath, "I can't. I can't." "You can," Elena snapped gently, giving him a sharp look. "We all can. Fear isn't weakness, it's a tool. Use it." They found a small clearing, partially sheltered by the overhanging roots of a massive tree. Its thick, twisted branches provided some protection from the rain and, more importantly, from any sightlines the enemy might have had. Elena quickly assessed the surroundings, noting every point of cover and potential escape route. Dwyer collapsed onto the muddy ground, groaning as he attended to his own injuries. Elena pulled first aid supplies from her pack, tearing bandages and pressing them against the worst wounds. The soldiers worked in silence, the only sounds the rain and distant calls of nocturnal creatures. Elena's mind drifted briefly, as it often did in moments like this, to her father. She could hear his voice as clearly as if he were beside her. "When everything falls apart, you'll know who you are. The jungle doesn't lie, kid. You either adapt or die." She allowed herself a brief pang of grief for her fallen squad members, for the friends she had lost in the ambush. But there was no time to dwell. The night was far from over. The enemy could be watching, tracking, waiting for any lapse in attention. Elena scanned the perimeter, flashlight briefly illuminating the shadows, revealing nothing but twisted roots, vines, and leaves slick with rain. She listened. The jungle seemed to breathe, and in its breath she felt menace. "Lang," she said quietly, kneeling beside him. "Keep the flashlight steady and watch the eastern path. Dwyer, stay near me. We'll take shifts. No one sleeps fully tonight." Lang nodded, still trembling. Elena could feel his fear, but also his desire to survive, to fight, and she used it to anchor her own focus. Fear was never gone, but it could be harnessed. Hours passed. The rain continued to pour, soaking through uniforms and chilling their bones. They huddled together under the tree's massive roots, taking turns scanning the perimeter. Every rustle, every shadow, every crack of a branch forced hearts to leap. Elena counted each second, each heartbeat, aware that the night was an enemy just as lethal as the men they had faced. At one point, a distant howl echoed through the jungle, a sound both animal and human, wild and cruel. Dwyer flinched, but Elena's gaze remained unwavering. "It's just the jungle," she whispered. "Nothing more. Don't let it scare you." But even as she spoke, she knew that the jungle was more than just trees and rain. It was alive, unpredictable, and merciless. She had felt it watching, calculating, pressing against her mind and body, testing her resolve. Later, as the rain softened, Elena ventured a brief reconnaissance around the clearing. The mud sucked at her boots, each step exhausting. She moved like a shadow, scanning every angle, listening to every sound. Her rifle was steady, her eyes sharp, and her mind alert. Every instinct told her the enemy had not abandoned them. They were merely regrouping. Returning to the group, she found Dwyer tending to Lang's minor cuts. "How's he holding up?" Elena asked. Dwyer shook his head. "Barely. But he'll follow orders." "That's something, at least." Elena nodded. "Good. We'll need that. The next few hours will test us more than the ambush did. Remember what I said. Fear is a tool. Use it, don't let it use you." The night seemed endless. Rain turned to a drizzle, then a light mist, clinging to every leaf and branch. Elena took the first shift, scanning the perimeter while Dwyer and Lang rested briefly. She could feel the strain in every muscle, the fatigue pressing against her mind. Yet she did not yield. Leadership required endurance, resolve, and clarity, even when the body begged for reprieve. As dawn began to tint the horizon with pale light, Elena shifted her gaze toward the rising mist. Footprints, fresh tracks moving toward the clearing. She froze, observing carefully. Not animals, humans, approaching silently, deliberately. The jungle had not abandoned its prey. It had her in its grip, and now it was delivering the next trial. She signaled Dwyer and Lang to rise quietly, weapons ready. The three moved in unison, silent as the wind. They positioned themselves behind the roots of the massive tree, the rising sun painting faint shadows across the ground. Suddenly, a low murmur came from the undergrowth insurgents, regrouping, moving in from multiple directions. Elena's mind worked like a machine, calculating angles, firing positions, and escape routes. She did not flinch. She would not. She had survived the first ambush. She would survive the night. Hours passed in tense stillness, with bursts of movement and occasional distant gunfire. Each time the enemy attempted to approach, Elena's squad reacted with precision, using traps, cover, and carefully aimed rifle shots. Fatigue pressed against them, but adrenaline carried them through. Finally, as the sun fully rose, they had survived the night. The jungle, momentarily quiet again, was smeared with mud, leaves, and the evidence of battle. Elena looked at her squad lying pale, Dwyer battered, but alive. They had endured. They had survived. But the night had left its mark. Physical exhaustion, emotional strain, and the stark realization that backup had not arrived weighed heavily. Elena knew that survival was only the first step. The enemy was still out there. The jungle was still alive, still dangerous. She gathered the team together. "We survived the night," she said, voice calm but firm. "But don't think this is over. Every step from here is a fight. Watch each other. Protect each other. And remember, no one gets left behind." Lang nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Dwyer gave a weak smile, exhaustion etched on his face. Elena herself felt the weight, but her resolve was unbroken. She would lead them through this jungle, through every threat, until they reached safety. The long night had ended, but the battle for survival was far from over. The Valley of Silence had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and shown them the depths of fear and endurance. And Elena Carter knew that the hardest trials were still ahead. Dawn had barely broken when Sergeant Elena Carter scanned the dense jungle, still damp with rain. Her team had survived the ambush, but the relief was short-lived. The jungle seemed to hum with a hidden menace, as if it had absorbed the chaos of the previous night and was now waiting, patient and silent. Elena's muscles ached, her uniform was soaked, and every nerve screamed exhaustion, but she couldn't afford to rest. Not yet. She crouched beside Dwyer and Lang, keeping her voice low. "We regroup, assess injuries, and move. There's no time for mistakes." "Not today." Dwyer nodded, still bruised and bleeding lightly from the night's firefight. Lang adjusted his grip on his rifle, eyes wide, jaw tight. They had survived, but Elena could see the weight of fear etched into their faces. They all knew the enemy was still out there. Elena signaled for Lang to check their perimeter, scanning for movement, while Dwyer tended to the minor wounds on his own arm. As the young private swept the clearing, a distant crackle came through the radio. Elena froze. "Command?" she asked cautiously, adjusting her earpiece. Static answered it first, then a voice, calm but unfamiliar, filled the earpiece. "Sergeant Carter," the voice said, smooth, authoritative. "We've been monitoring your position. Situation's under control. Hold your position until backup arrives." Relief washed over the team briefly. Elena's mind, trained to detect anomalies, immediately noticed something off. The voice was clipped, too measured, lacking the warmth or inflection of anyone she knew from base. Copy that, she replied cautiously. Coordinates confirmed. ETA on backup? A pause, then the voice said, You've been compromised. Extraction has been delayed indefinitely. Consider yourselves expendable. Elena froze, her heart skipping a beat. What do you mean? Compromised? She demanded. Static, then a cold, almost mocking laugh. You were never meant to survive this mission. HQ doesn't answer for those who fail. The line went dead. Dwyer muttered a curse. Lang's face went pale. Elena's jaw tightened. Betrayal. They had been sold out. Someone inside had leaked their position, ensuring the enemy's ambush had maximum effect. The enemy knew their strengths, their likely movements, their vulnerabilities. This was no random attack. It had been orchestrated. Elena's hands clenched around her rifle. She felt the familiar surge of controlled fury, the kind that fueled her best decisions under fire. Listen carefully, she said, voice low but firm. They wanted us dead. They underestimated us. We're not just surviving, we're striking back. But we do it smart. Every step counts. Dwyer groaned, still weak from injuries, but nodded. Lang's trembling hands steadied slightly, the spark of determination igniting behind fear. They were battered, but not broken. Elena took stock of their position. The ambush had left them in a clearing, partially exposed, but the high ground behind them, a ridge lined with jagged roots and thick foliage, offered an advantage. They could use it to monitor enemy movements, prepare traps, and dictate the pace of any engagement. She moved swiftly, repositioning her squad behind the ridge. Every step was calculated, every rustle minimized. The rain had softened the ground, leaving tracks easily visible to anyone following them, but the cover of thick foliage gave them concealment. We'll turn their advantage into our trap, Elena whispered. They think we're weak. We'll show them what happens when they underestimate their target. Hours passed as the team worked silently. Dwyer set up improvised medical care for the wounded, while Lang helped Elena scout paths and plan firing angles. They salvaged any usable gear from fallen attackers, setting traps with grenades, tripwires, and debris. The jungle, once an enemy in its own right, became their ally, covering their movements, masking sounds, and providing strategic opportunities. As night approached, Elena crouched in the mud, surveying the jungle with her binoculars. She could see shadows flitting between trees, small movements betraying the enemy's presence. They were still out there, regrouping, waiting for the moment they thought the squad would be vulnerable. But Elena wasn't vulnerable. She was ready. She had survived the ambush, endured the long night, and now she had clarity. This was a fight for their lives, yes, but also a fight for justice. The betrayal had lit a fire inside her, sharp and burning. Whoever had orchestrated this had awakened something fierce. Lang, she whispered, pulling the young private close. You see those shadows? That's our cue. We pick the time. We pick the angle. Fear is a tool, not a chain. Remember that. Lang nodded, swallowing hard but visibly steeling himself. Dwyer, grim-faced, loaded his weapon, ready for whatever came. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the jungle in darkness, broken only by the faint flickers of distant fires from enemy camps. Elena's team remained hidden, silent, watching. She could feel the tension in the air, a predator's anticipation mirrored in her own heartbeat. Then came the first sign of movement, a patrol, small, confident, unaware of the traps Elena had set. She signaled Lang and Dwyer, pointing to the first tripwire she had placed earlier. A subtle pull of a cord sent a small explosion into the path of the approaching enemy, throwing them off balance and alerting others. Chaos erupted among the enemy patrol, exactly as Elena had anticipated. From her position, she fired precise, deadly shots, each one hitting its mark. Dwyer provided cover for the wounded, and Lang, his nerves finally steady, shot with accuracy he had never known he possessed. The betrayal had turned into an opportunity. They were no longer prey, they were hunters. Hours passed as the jungle became a controlled battlefield. Elena's traps and strategic positioning allowed her small squad to inflict maximum disruption on a superior enemy force. She felt the surge of adrenaline and focus she had relied on in past battles, the precise calm in the midst of chaos. Finally, after hours of skirmishes, the enemy retreated into the shadows. The jungle returned to silence, rain dripping from leaves and branches, the smell of gunpowder and mud heavy in the air. Elena checked her squad, Lang bruised and shaken but alive, Dwyer battered but breathing. They had survived the night, and now, more than ever, Elena understood the depth of the betrayal they had faced. But there was no time for celebration. The night had shown them that the enemy was cunning, patient, and well-informed. Whoever had sold them out would not stop there. Elena's mind raced, planning the next move, anticipating enemy strategies, considering every angle. She crouched beside Lang and Dwyer, voice low but commanding. We survived. That's step 1. Step 2, finish this. Make them regret underestimating us. They wanted silence. We'll give them noise. Lang's eyes met hers. A flicker of courage ignited. Yes, Sergeant, he said quietly, voice steady despite exhaustion. Dwyer nodded, adjusting his rifle. We're with you. Always? Elena's jaw tightened. She looked out into the jungle, the dense shadows and misty valleys stretching endlessly. This betrayal had changed the mission, but not its purpose. They had survived ambushes, exhaustion, and treachery. Now they would strike back not for glory, but for survival, for justice, and for the memory of those they had lost. The Valley of Silence had spoken once through the jungle's chaos. Now Elena would make it speak again on her terms. The jungle had never been so alive or so deadly. Every rustle of leaves, every distant crack of a branch, sent adrenaline surging through Sergeant Elena Carter's veins. She crouched atop the ridge, rain-soaked and mud-streaked, eyes scanning the shadows for the enemy that had betrayed them. The Valley of Silence had become a crucible, and Elena had forged her team into weapons of precision and survival. Below, through the mist and fog, enemy forces moved like shadows, unaware that every step forward was into a trap meticulously laid by Elena and her squad. Tripwires, improvised grenades, and natural choke points turned the jungle into a labyrinth of death. Elena felt the controlled rush of anticipation, the calm before unleashing everything she had prepared. Lang, she whispered, her voice barely carrying through the rain, cover the eastern path. Dwyer, suppress the high ground on their left. I'll take the center and pick targets. Lang's hands were steady now, every motion precise. Dwyer's face was grim, his bruises and bandages evidence of the night's ordeal, yet his determination was clear. Together, they formed a deadly triangle of firepower. Elena knew that coordination, not brute force, would win this fight. The first enemy patrol triggered one of the tripwires. A small, controlled explosion sent a shockwave through the path, throwing the attackers off balance. Elena opened fire with practiced precision, bullets tearing through the jungle with deadly intent. One by one, enemy soldiers fell, their coordinated assault turning into chaotic retreat. But the enemy was adaptive. More figures emerged from the undergrowth, faster, angrier, moving with lethal intent. The firestorm had begun. Elena moved like a shadow through the ridge, her rifle an extension of herself. Each shot was calculated, deliberate. She could feel the rhythm of the jungle, the beat of danger syncing with her heartbeat. The enemy fired back, bullets striking trees, dirt, and leaves around her, but she didn't flinch. Each shot was a message They had underestimated her, and now they would pay. Dwyer's voice cut through the chaos. "Sergeant, left flank. They're trying to circle." Elena pivoted, dispatching 3 enemies advancing through the thick undergrowth. Lang's fire covered her rear, precise and deadly. The jungle erupted with sound, the crack of rifles, the thud of bodies hitting mud, and the hissing of improvised explosives. The rain turned into a torrential downpour, blurring vision but muffling some of their noise. Elena took advantage of it, moving through the mud and roots with uncanny precision, guiding her team, taking out threats, and ensuring the wounded were protected. Hours passed in what felt like an eternity of adrenaline and focus. Elena's squad was battered but effective. Every time the enemy regrouped, they encountered new traps, new fields of fire, and the disciplined precision of a small but determined team. At one point, an enemy soldier managed to slip past Lang's cover, sprinting toward Dwyer. Elena reacted instantly, firing a single lethal shot that dropped him mid-stride. Dwyer's head whipped toward her, a nod of gratitude barely audible over the storm. Elena's mind raced with strategy. They had survived ambushes, betrayal, and a long night, but this firestorm demanded more than courage. It demanded control. She signaled a retreat toward a natural choke point she had noted earlier, a narrow, muddy ravine flanked by jagged roots and rocks. As the enemy advanced, the squad moved as one, luring them into the trap. The ravine became a death corridor. Elena had set explosives along the edges and placed sharp debris to slow any flanking attempts. The enemy surged forward, unaware of the devastation awaiting them. "Now!" Elena shouted. The trap detonated in a controlled explosion, throwing mud, debris, and enemy soldiers into chaos. Gunfire erupted from all sides as Elena's squad fired with deadly precision, exploiting the confusion. One by one, attackers fell, retreating, panicked and disoriented. Lang, finally confident in his skills, fired with accuracy, picking off enemy soldiers attempting to escape the trap. Dwyer provided cover, moving with agility despite his injuries. Elena herself was everywhere at once, moving, shooting, calculating, surviving. The jungle was a storm of chaos and blood, but Elena's squad controlled the battlefield. They had turned the betrayal into opportunity, fear into a weapon, and the enemy's confidence into despair. As the last of the enemy forces retreated, the rain began to lighten, leaving the battlefield muddy, chaotic, and quiet except for the distant calls of the jungle's nocturnal creatures. Elena crouched, rifle ready, scanning the shadows for any sign of renewed attack. "They're gone. For now," Lang said, voice shaky but determined. Elena nodded, her mind already shifting to the next phase. They had survived the firestorm, but the jungle was relentless. Each battle was temporary. The threat always remained. "We hold here, regroup, and prepare for extraction," she said. "Stay alert. Even in silence, danger waits." Dwyer helped Elena carry minor supplies from the fallen enemies, salvaging ammunition and equipment. The team moved carefully through the mud, tending to injuries and checking their perimeter. Every step was deliberate, cautious because the jungle could kill as easily as bullets. Elena's thoughts drifted briefly to her fallen comrades. Names, faces, memories flashed across her mind. She had survived, yes, but at a cost. Every life mattered. Every loss was a reminder of the stakes. She vowed silently that the betrayal would be avenged, that those responsible would face consequences. Hours passed in tense vigilance. The jungle, momentarily subdued after the firestorm, seemed almost peaceful, but Elena knew better. Its silence was deceptive. She signaled Lang and Dwyer to take shifts monitoring the perimeter while she rested briefly, leaning against a tree and breathing deeply. When dawn began to break again, pale light filtering through the canopy, Elena surveyed the battlefield. Mud, debris, and blood marked the terrain. The enemy had been repelled, the betrayal confronted, and the firestorm survived. Yet, even as she exhaled in relief, Elena's mind was already planning. The jungle would not forgive carelessness. The enemy would return. Extraction was still hours away. The mission was far from over. She gathered her squad close. "We've survived the firestorm," she said, voice firm but calm. "We've turned their ambush into our advantage. But remember this jungle doesn't forgive weakness. We move smart, we move together, and we survive. Understand?" Lang nodded, eyes steady now. Dwyer adjusted his rifle and gave a curt nod. They were tired, battered, and bloodied, but alive. They had faced death, betrayal, and chaos, and they had survived. Elena looked out into the dense green expanse of the jungle. Every shadow, every rustle, every unseen movement was a potential threat, but she felt ready. For the first time, she understood the full depth of her own resilience, and the power of trust, courage, and calculated action. The Valley of Silence had roared and raged. Elena Carter had stared it down and survived. But the battle for survival, for justice, and for extraction was not yet finished. And when the enemy returned, they would face the full force of a squad that had become more than survivors. They had become hunters. The jungle had fallen silent once more, but Sergeant Elena Carter knew better than to trust it. The firestorm they had unleashed had scattered the enemy, but their retreat did not mean defeat. Somewhere, hidden in the dense green chaos, the enemy was regrouping, calculating their next strike. Every step Elena took reminded her that survival required vigilance, strategy, and relentless determination. Dawn had broken, casting pale light across the battlefield. Mud and debris coated the squad, their weapons slick from rain and grime, their uniforms torn from the jungle's relentless embrace. Lang moved stiffly beside Elena, exhaustion written into every movement, yet his eyes burned with a newfound resolve. Dwyer, bruised and battered, leaned heavily on Elena as they navigated the rough terrain, scavenging ammunition and supplies from the remnants of the battle. "We move east," Elena whispered, scanning the horizon. "There's a ridge and a river that can get us out of here. It's risky, but staying put is deadlier." Lang nodded, trying to steady his breath. "You think they'll follow?" "They will," Elena said firmly, "but we'll control how they engage. Follow my lead." The journey was treacherous. Every step sank into mud, tangled roots threatened to trip them, and the air was thick with humidity and the smell of blood. The jungle seemed almost sentient, pressing against them, testing their endurance and resolve. Elena moved ahead, rifle ready, eyes scanning every shadow. Behind her, Lang and Dwyer followed, tense and alert. Hours passed. The jungle shifted around them, dense foliage masking paths, concealing unseen dangers. Suddenly, a sharp crack of a branch echoed behind them. Elena spun, raising her rifle. A small patrol of enemy soldiers had detected their movement. The squad froze for a heartbeat, calculating. Escape was possible, but only if they acted decisively. Lang left. "Dwyer, cover right," Elena commanded. Bullets tore through leaves and bark, striking mud and branches as her squad returned fire. Alana's shots were precise, taking down 2 attackers before they could react. The remaining enemy hesitated and retreated into the jungle, leaving behind signs of their failed pursuit. "Keep moving," Elena shouted. "We can't stop now." The squad pressed on, navigating the thick underbrush toward the river Elena had spotted earlier. Every sense was on edge. The betrayal, the ambushes, and the firestorm had taught them that danger lurked everywhere. Finally, they reached the riverbank. The water rushed swiftly, brown and turbulent from the rain. Crossing it was risky, but it was their only path to extraction. Elena waded in first, testing the current. Strong, but manageable. "Follow me," she said. Dwyer and Lang stepped in, boots slipping against submerged rocks. The river was icy, numbing their muscles, but Elena's focus never wavered. She guided them across, scanning for enemy snipers or traps, every sense heightened by exhaustion and adrenaline. Midway, a bullet splashed into the water near Dwyer, sending up a spray of mud and water. Elena's head snapped to the source. Shadows flitted along the far bank. Enemy soldiers had anticipated their crossing. "Move faster," she shouted. "Keep low." Lang slipped, nearly losing his balance, but Elena caught his arm, pulling him to safety. Dwyer, bleeding but determined, gritted his teeth and kept moving. They made it across, lungs burning, muscles aching, but alive. The far bank provided brief cover, thick trees and overhanging roots masking their movement. Elena motioned for them to rest briefly, checking weapons and ammo. Her eyes scanned the jungle ahead. Extraction was still hours away, but she had a plan. The enemy, aware of their escape, regrouped and attempted to flank them. Elena led the squad through a narrow gorge, where the terrain forced the enemy into a bottleneck. She had anticipated this, using it to their advantage. "Hold position," she commanded. "Let them come to us." As the enemy advanced, Elena fired from cover, her shots finding heads, shoulders, and torsos. Lang, finally confident in his abilities, covered her flank, taking down 2 attackers with deadly precision. Dwyer suppressed the enemy's fire with controlled bursts, protecting their rear. The jungle became a battleground once more, but this time, Elena controlled the engagement. The enemy, forced into the gorge, struggled to navigate the treacherous terrain. Traps, debris, and precise fire forced them into retreat. One by one, the attackers fell or fled, their morale shattered. Hours later, the sounds of distant helicopters echoed through the valley. Elena's heart leapt. Extraction had arrived, but she knew better than to assume safety. They were still exposed, and the enemy could strike at any moment. She signaled her squad. "Stay sharp. Move to the clearing near the ridge. Keep low, keep quiet." The squad navigated the final stretch with care, finally reaching the clearing. The helicopters were visible now, cutting through the mist like silver blades. One descended, kicking up mud and debris as it touched down. Elena approached first, motioning for Lang and Dwyer to follow. As they boarded, she scanned the jungle, eyes sharp for any last-minute threats. The betrayal, the ambushes, the firestorm, they had survived it all, but she knew the cost. Her squad was battered, wounded, and shaken, yet alive. Inside the helicopter, Elena allowed herself a moment to breathe. The rotors churned the air, lifting them away from the jungle that had tested them so brutally. Lang slumped, exhausted but alive. Dwyer leaned against the wall, bruised but breathing. Elena looked down at the jungle below, a tangle of green, mud, and danger. The Valley of Silence had taken much from them, but it had also forged something indestructible. Her squad had survived, adapted, and emerged stronger. The helicopter lifted higher, and Elena's mind raced. The betrayal would not go unanswered. HQ had turned against them, but justice and survival would be hers to deliver. The jungle had tested her resolve, but she had proven herself a leader, a warrior, and a survivor. As the sun rose fully over the horizon, illuminating the misty canopy, Elena allowed herself a small smile. The battle for survival was over for now, but the fight for truth, for justice, and for the memory of those they had lost was only beginning. The Valley of Silence receded beneath them, green and endless. But Elena Carter knew she would return not as prey, but as someone who had conquered its trials. And when she did, she would not forgive. The helicopter cut through the morning sky, leaving the Valley of Silence behind, its secrets and dangers buried beneath layers of mist and green. Sergeant Elena Carter leaned against the cabin wall, her rifle resting across her knees. She was soaked, exhausted, and battered, but the fire that had driven her through ambushes, betrayal, and a jungle inferno still burned within her. She glanced at Lang and Dwyer, their faces pale, eyes tired, yet alive. For the first time in hours or maybe days, there was a moment of quiet. "Everyone alive?" she asked, her voice low but commanding. Lang nodded, though the tremor in his jaw betrayed the trauma of the last 72 hours. Dwyer exhaled slowly, pressing a bandaged hand to his forehead, still sore from the explosion in Part 3. "Alive," he replied, voice hoarse. "Thanks to you, Sergeant." Elena allowed herself a brief nod. Praise was unnecessary. Survival had been the mission, and they had succeeded. But as the helicopter carried them to safety, her mind replayed every ambush, every betrayal, every calculated shot that had saved them from the jaws of death. The jungle had tested them beyond measure, and they had passed, but the cost had been heavy. When the helicopter landed at the extraction point to secure U.S. forward base on the edge of the rainforest, Elena's squad disembarked cautiously. Medics rushed forward, checking wounds, administering first aid, and hauling the injured to waiting stretchers. Elena allowed herself a moment to look back at the dense green wall of trees beyond the base, the Valley of Silence stretching infinitely, its secrets intact. Inside the debriefing room, Elena's team sat silently, exhausted but alert. Maps and satellite images littered the table, a stark reminder of the mission's original objective. The ambush, the betrayal, and the jungle's deadly challenges had changed the mission irrevocably. But Elena knew they had survived against impossible odds. A senior officer entered, eyes cold and calculating. "Sergeant Carter," he began, "we were informed your unit suffered heavy engagement with insurgent forces. Can you give a full report?" Elena's gaze didn't waver. "Sir," she said steadily, "we were ambushed due to compromised intelligence. HQ failed to notify us of enemy positions. Half our squad is lost, but we survived through coordinated defense, tactical engagement, and exploiting enemy weaknesses. We neutralized the threat and secured extraction." The officer's expression hardened. "Compromised intelligence? Explain." Elena's jaw tightened. She had anticipated this moment, and her calm voice carried the weight of truth. "Sir, someone inside HQ leaked our position. The ambush was deliberate. We were meant to fail." A murmur ran through the room, the gravity of her accusation settling like a storm. The officer's eyes flickered, then narrowed. "That is a serious allegation, Sergeant." "I know, sir," Elena replied evenly. "But the evidence is clear. Enemy forces knew our positions, our likely movements, and our tactical patterns. That level of intelligence doesn't come from reconnaissance. It comes from betrayal." Lang shifted in his seat, still pale, but he gave a subtle nod of support. Dwyer exhaled, letting the tension ease slightly. Elena's words weren't just her own. They were backed by survival, strategy, and the brutal truth of combat. The officer said nothing for a moment, then finally spoke. "We will launch a full investigation. Your actions, Sergeant Carter, saved your team. HQ's betrayal cannot overshadow that. Report to debriefing in 2 hours." Elena nodded, but her mind was already moving forward. Surviving the jungle had been one battle. Ensuring justice and accountability would be another. The Valley of Silence had tested her, but it had also proven her resilience, leadership, and the indomitable will to protect those under her command. Later, as she walked through the base, Elena paused by the memorial wall, a tribute to soldiers lost in operations across the region. Her thoughts went to the friends she had lost in the ambush, the firestorm, and the long night. Names etched in stone, sacrifices etched into memory. She touched the wall lightly, a silent vow passing through her mind. Their deaths would not be in vain. Lang approached quietly, his face pale but composed. "Sergeant, thank you. You kept us alive. I don't think I could have survived without you." Elena looked at him, exhaustion and pride mingling in her eyes. "You survived, Lang. That's because you listened, learned, and fought. Leadership is a partnership. We survived because we trusted each other." Dwyer, now walking without support, joined them. "And you led. Through the fire, the betrayal, the jungle itself you led." Elena allowed herself a small smile, though it was tinged with sorrow. "We led together. And now we ensure that those who betrayed us are held accountable. Justice isn't always immediate, but it's inevitable." The debriefing was intense. Elena recounted every ambush, every trap, every decision, every life or death moment in precise detail. Her calm and methodical narration left no doubt. The jungle had been merciless, the betrayal real, and the survival extraordinary. Analysts pored over her maps, satellite images, and reports, cross-referencing enemy positions and evidence of HQ leaks. Hours later, she stepped outside the debriefing room, exhausted but resolute. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the base. Elena knew the path ahead was still uncertain. The betrayal might take months to expose fully, the investigations might be slow, and justice might be delayed, but she had survived, and she had a squad still alive to fight alongside her. As she walked to the edge of the base, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The jungle had tested every limit of human endurance: fear, fatigue, grief, and rage. She had seen the worst of it and the best of herself. Elena Carter had emerged from the Valley of Silence, not only as a survivor, but as a leader forged in fire, betrayal, and chaos. The squad reunited, sitting silently on a weathered bench overlooking the valley beyond the base's perimeter. Lang finally exhaled fully, the tension of days leaving his body. Dwyer's bruised face broke into a faint, tired smile. Elena gazed out at the jungle, listening to its distant, whispering winds. The silence was no longer oppressive. It was a reminder of what they had endured and conquered. "Tomorrow," Elena said softly, voice carrying over the wind, "we move forward. We honor those we lost, we expose the betrayal, and we make sure this valley never takes anyone else unprepared. We survived. And now we fight for justice." Lang and Dwyer nodded, their faces reflecting exhaustion, pride, and determination. Together, they had faced ambush, betrayal, and the jungle's relentless fury. Together, they had survived firestorms and treacherous nights. Together, they would carry forward the lessons learned, the lives saved, and the memory of those who had fallen. Elena Carter's eyes scanned the horizon one final time. The Valley of Silence stretched infinitely, a verdant, deadly labyrinth. But she no longer feared it. She had faced it, conquered it, and emerged stronger. Every shadow, every rustle, every challenge had tested her limits and proven that human resilience, courage, and leadership could triumph over even the most relentless adversary. The helicopter's rotors would return tomorrow, extracting them from the base of operations and carrying them home. But the true victory lay not in leaving the jungle behind, it lay in survival, in justice, and in the unwavering bond between a sergeant and her squad. As night fell and stars began to pierce the sky above the base, Elena Carter finally allowed herself a deep, steady breath. The firestorm had ended. The betrayal had been confronted. And the Valley of Silence, though still vast and enigmatic, had been conquered not by luck, but by skill, courage, and an unbreakable will. For the first time in days, she smiled.